Hey everyone, Connie here, and welcome to another Why I Love Wakfu video. So yeah, it's been a while since we did this. I believe the last one was put up on February 11th, so it's been over a month, and we're getting near the end of March, and I realized I hadn't yet done the March video for this. I do this every month, and I haven't done this one for this month yet. Now keep in mind, there are only two more after this, so there will be one in April and one in May, and then we're done with this series. But I do want to get to this one now. So today we are talking about genre in regards to Wakfu, and this one I don't think will be that long, but you never know. You never know. Considering it's unscripted and just kind of going off the seat of my pants, yeah, could end up as long as it needs to be. So when you first see Wakfu, you kind of wonder what kind of series this is going to be. From the first episode, there are hints of sci-fi with Knox and his time travel. There is hints of high fantasy with the world in general, as well as the fact that there is a dragon introduced right off the bat. You see these kind of other like fantasy elements, such as Ava the Craw being very elf-like. As well as magic being a large part of the world, and just the world in general kind of seems very fantasy style. You also have a lot of good comedy, and even some dramatic stuff. So it's like you kind of aren't sure exactly how to classify Wakfu genre-wise. And as you continue on into the series, through the first season, the second season, the OVAs, the third season, you realize that that's not unintentional. See, at least from how I perceive it, Wakfu is a purposeful blending of genres. And I think a lot of shows do this, to be fair. A lot of shows will have all of these different kind of things in them to give depth and multiple layers to the story and the characters. Sure. But most shows will tend to have a specific style and genre to it. When you get down to it, MLP is a fantasy series. When you get down to it, Steven Universe is an action-adventure series. Star Versus would also be considered action-adventure, etc., etc. And all of them have core elements of other genres. All of them have comedy. And so on and so forth. Another example, by the way, would be like Gravity Falls being a supernatural mystery series. So yeah, but Wakfu isn't as cut and dry as those other shows. It's not as straightforward. You could call it a fantasy series, but that would actually be taking away a lot of the other stuff it involves. Especially with season 1, which does involve some sci-fi stuff with Knox. It goes into a lot more than that. There are points in the series where it feels more like a straight drama than anything else. There are points where it feels like a straight comedy, and there's even a couple points where it almost feels parody-like. And it's hard to say that it's one thing just with elements of others. Instead, it comes across as the creators were trying to create this in-depth, realistic world, in a way, you know what I mean, in terms of it's all of this kind of stuff together. It's not just one thing. Yes, the world is mainly based upon fantasy, very clearly. But the fact that it does have this other stuff, it does have legitimate drama, it does have legitimate comedy, legitimate sci-fi elements, action-adventure elements. I mean, most of the series is very adventure-based, in the same way that you could say that One Piece is very adventure-based. There's even a couple points where it kind of plays around with horror aspects. And most of the series will take more of the adventure route. We'll take more of the fantasy adventure kind of thing. In a similar vein, you could say to Lord of the Rings. But it still blends in those other genres. There's this big epic action sequence in the second season, at the end of the second season, and it's pretty much that entire ending bit is pretty much all action. It's this big action-packed grand finale to the season. Season 3 has a lot of focus on drama and character depth. Season 1 is much more comedic and fun and lighthearted. The OVAs take a much more serious route, getting into morality. So it's like these various seasons and OVAs and everything tend to have a focus to them. But all of them blend together with the other stuff. Again, season 1 is definitely more comedic and lighthearted, but you still have some very intense drama. You still have some really emotional shit when you really get down to it with Knox. You have a really heavy finale. That when you see Ava cry after Tristapin gives his life to stop Knox, that's really heavy and intense. And you see all of this pretty much from the first episode. The first episode begins with this scene that combines both the sci-fi aspect of Knox's character and the time travel part of all of that, with an intense action scene with a fantasy character, a dragon. So it's fantasy, sci-fi, and action all blended together in one single scene. And neither part seems to take precedence over the other. Neither aspect seems to be more important. Instead, they're all a part of it together. Take one away and it wouldn't be as good. It wouldn't be as impactful. It wouldn't be as special. You get into learning about Yugo and you see the early stuff with the fights that they have. And yes, a lot of it is very fantasy-based, but you see other stuff that brings in more sci-fi action. You see stuff that brings in more comedic competitions and stuff. And you even see the dramatic side of things. And even some pretty surprisingly powerful moments that are not what you would expect to be pretty powerful. Like the time when, I think it might be the second or third episode, when Amalia is talking to the tree. And it's actually surprisingly moving when watching that. And the show also kind of takes these blended genres and runs with them in kind of these segmented ways. As I mentioned already, each season kind of has its own focused genre. But even in the seasons, there's like bits and pieces like, okay, early season 1 is very, very comedic based, but by the end of season 1, it's very intense and dramatic and serious and action-packed. But the thing is, it doesn't ever feel like it changed. Even though if you like watched the beginning of the season compared to the end, you would notice that difference. Like it'd be very stark. But going through the episodes naturally, you don't notice the change because it's gradual. It's a natural blending of those two sides, and you see how it builds up. You see where it comes from, and you see it go at a slower pace to where it feels natural, to where it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere. Almost like you earned that action-packed, dramatic, intense finale. And all of the hints are built up throughout the season. So it especially doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere because it doesn't. Everything was built up. And that is how you blend genres right. Now, I'm not saying that other shows, again, haven't done this. Steven Universe did this very well. Um, but it's more apparent with shows like Wakfu. I don't know exactly the reason. I don't know if it's the world it takes place in, if it's the characters, if it's the specific stories. But something about the way Wakfu handles it just feels so much more noticeable with how well it handles the blending of these genres. Um, and honestly, it's impressive. It is legitimately really impressive. And again, and again, I by no means think this is an exclusive thing. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Heck, there are video games out there that blend genres amazingly. Detroit Become Human is a phenomenal example of this. Featuring comedy, action, sci-fi, drama, all in one story that really makes all of it feel like one cohesive narrative. And Wakfu does the same thing. And not every instance of it feels natural. There are a couple points where it just feels like it's kind of tacked on a bit, admittedly. Like there's a couple points in season 3, for example, where it gets kind of silly at points, and it almost feels like that they did it just to have that levity, and it doesn't feel natural in its execution. One such example is the one guy in the tower, the one guardian in the tower who's obsessed with underwear. I didn't like that because I felt like it was extremely forced and honestly just really weird. It wasn't entertaining because it felt unnatural to how everything else was going. And I mean, there was comedy otherwise at other points in that season that felt more natural. That was too much, though. And I feel it was one of the weaker parts of season 3. Because, again, it wasn't as natural, it wasn't as blended into the story. So, yeah, in general, in conclusion, Wakfu's genre is definitely mainly fantasy. But it blends everything else into it. You can pretty much name a genre, and it's in Wakfu to some degree. I mean, you have the supernatural with the shoes. You have a lot of action and adventure. You even, again, have some aspects of horror. There's a couple points I can name specifically, like with the vampire guy. There's a point, I believe, where these plants were turning people into zombies or something along that line. There are aspects of horror in this series. And granted, they're not like as amazingly introduced as, like, say, Jack in the Haunted House from Samurai Jack or Abracadabra from Powerpuff Girls. Because, again, they feel more natural with this universe that was created, the Krasmas. They feel much more natural in that than with Powerpuff Girls or Samurai Jack or whatnot, where it's, I wouldn't say comes out of nowhere because it makes sense in the context of those shows. But also at the same time, it feels so far removed from other episodes. I guess a way to compare it more accurately to how it feels more natural would be saying, like, oh, this episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog was really spooky. But it's like all of Courage the Cowardly Dog has that kind of idea to it. That's kind of the point of the show. So it feels more natural. It feels more like just a part of the series. Granted, again, Wakfu's not like Courage the Cowardly Dog. Wakfu is not a spooky show in general. It just has spooky moments that feel natural in their execution due to feeling like a natural part of the world that was created. And again, like the only other parts that I can think of that really don't fit, there's I think it's in season one. There's an early, yeah, I think it would have to be in season one, where our heroes enter this booth ball tournament, and it just feels so out of place and random. And I mean, there's another booth ball tournament later on, I think in season two or whatnot, or maybe season three. No, it'd have to be season two, wouldn't it? I think it's season two. But it feels a lot more natural at that point and with what's going on in it. Um, and then, of course, my issues with certain things being retconned, like Tristapin's death, that just really break immersion and make it feel unnatural in that way. But genre-wise, again, it does a very, very good job at blending these genres and making it feel like it's all just part of this world, which compares to like the real world. We have all this kind of stuff in our world. We have examples of all of this kind of stuff. Maybe not fantasy to a degree because that's literally the opposite of the real world, but you know what I mean. The real world is a very diverse and wild place. We have all kinds of different stuff, all kinds of different people, all kinds of different things going on. And so when you have a show like this showing this much diversity in its genres, but also feeling like a perfect blend, it feels like this is a real world in and of itself. Like this is a well thought out universe. And I can appreciate that. But tell me in the comments below what you think about the blending of the genres with Wakfu. Tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you so much for tuning in. For now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.